Hello to everyone watching this video. I'm Bunmei. Today we get a Hephaestus theory, so get your popcorn ready, because this is about to start.
Punishment and Redemption, the Rebirth of Aphrodite, full story. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, was a title she did not deserve, as her actions brought her closer to the personification of the antithesis of love. She believed that, if she herself was unhappy because she was united to her ugly husband and did not love, then no one deserved to be happy and to be able to love. Therefore, she manipulated people's hearts so that they would fall into temptation and be unfaithful. She enjoyed seeing the broken hearts of both mortals and gods. However, as with every action, there is always a reaction, and she could not avoid the consequences of her actions. From the beginning, Aphrodite knew her day would go badly. First, a mere mortal dared to claim that she was more beautiful than she was, please, as if that was even remotely possible. And now, Zeus was furious with her for punishing that mortal. And now, she was on trial. Just for putting that despicable mortal in her place, she found herself in the Hall of the Gods, with handcuffs wrapped around her hands. Complete madness. After all, she was loved by everyone, and it was completely unfair that she was now being punished and judged. She was deeply insulted by what was happening. "What is your defense, Aphrodite?" Zeus asked, his eyes flashing with barely contained rage. What Aphrodite had done had not pleased him at all. Around the room, small flashes of lightning illuminated everything, demonstrating the intensity of her anger. She was aware that she should be worried. Whenever Zeus was in a bad mood, things didn't end well. However, at the moment, she could not find a hint of remorse or regret for her actions. He firmly believed that he had acted in the right way to demand respect and avoid future disrespect. Besides, who could be so foolish as to even consider that he was superior to her in any way, especially in matters of beauty? From Aphrodite's perspective, the mortal in question deserved everything that had happened to her. "I don't understand what I did wrong," the goddess replied, an expression of distaste curving her perfect lips. "That pathetic mortal offended me. And in response to her offense, I made her fall in love with her own son. Isn't that a perfect punishment? Now, both she and her bastard of a son are shunned by their families and live in misery." A faint smile crept across Aphrodite's lips, as she silently enjoyed the suffering of the woman who had dared to offend her. It was a delight to watch as that woman fell into misery, but Aphrodite pushed the thought from her mind. Besides, the goddess of love continued in a defiant tone, "You have never before meddled in my affairs or how I conduct them. So why do you decide to intervene now?" Aphrodite scolded Zeus. Zeus began to get angry at the way the goddess spoke to him, as she downplayed her actions. His face turned red with anger, a reflection of the growing anger that dominated him. Aphrodite watched Zeus' furious expression and noticed that the red on his face did not enhance the beauty that the king of Olympus usually radiated, but decided not to mention it, as she did not want to get into any more trouble. "You know perfectly well why I'm upset with you," Zeus snapped at her, his blue eyes flashing with electric sparks as they remained fixed on her. Hera felt irritated, coming to the same conclusion as everyone at the meeting. The reason behind her husband's discomfort was more than obvious. Zeus, the most womanizing god on Olympus, the most unfaithful if you don't count Aphrodite, had probably fallen in love with this mortal woman, or perhaps her son. You could never be completely sure with him, as he seemed to think more with his crotch than with his head. "Don't think I don't know why you're upset. You just want to have sex with that mortal," Aphrodite said impulsively. "So what? Do what you always do to win women over, disguise yourself as her son and that's it. Leave me alone over something that's none of your business. Besides, I'm not going to lift my curse on her." After speaking his mind, he relaxed. Now, thinking more clearly, the goddess came to the conclusion that this had not been her best time to speak her mind. Surely, she could have found a better way to approach the situation. She could even have improved the way she had addressed Zeus. But it was too late. The events that were to follow confirmed Aphrodite's fears that she had been overly impulsive in her speech. The atmosphere in the room was charged with a palpable tension. Any glimmer of patience that might have remained in Zeus had vanished completely. There was no turning back now. His eyes radiated a barely contained fury, while his voice rang out with authority and great anger. "You mustn't play with people's feelings like that, Aphrodite," he exclaimed in annoyance, his tone suffused with indignation. You may think it's funny or that you're entitled to do it, but you're not. Everyone should be free and not bound by your whims and envy. I am the goddess of love, she interrupted him, frowning angrily. It is my duty to intervene in people's feelings and do as I wish. If I don't, who else will? Aphrodite's interruption only aggravated Zeus' irritation. His eyes seemed to glow with stormy fury, which made Aphrodite once again realize her mistake. By all the gods, why couldn't she just shut up? The goddess chided herself, conscious of her tendency to speak before thinking. The atmosphere became even more tense, as the two gods engaged in a conflict that threatened unpredictable consequences. She would stand her ground. She would not back down or admit she had been wrong. She felt no guilt for having cheated on her husband, Hephaestus, or for having shared her love with everyone but him. And she had no intention of starting to do so now. So why should she shut her mouth when her words were completely true? She was never wrong. Never ever. Zeus proceeded to speak in a firm voice. Therefore, you will be severely punished for your cruel actions. We all agree that we need a respite from your amorous entanglements. That is why we have decided to temporarily withdraw your powers. Only when you learn to behave more appropriately will we consider your forgiveness. The goddess was filled with indignation. Forgive me? Everyone here loves me. No one could even consider such a ridiculous punishment. I have never acted with malice in my heart. However, her words fell on deaf ears. No one seemed to be paying attention. As she looked around, she noticed that everyone was deep in their own thoughts, deliberately avoiding meeting her gaze. I'm sure they won't let them punish me, she thought firmly. It was unimaginable that any of them would not be on her side. They all loved her. Aphrodite waited anxiously for someone to come to her defense. However, time passed and no one stood up for her. Not even the person to whom she had given much of her love, Ares, the god of war, with whom she shared most of her time. Even with a forced marriage to Hephaestus, Aphrodite never gave her love and could not help but be attracted to Ares. In her heart, she was convinced that her love for him was genuine, but she also knew that every time she expressed this feeling to her husband, it was as if she was stabbing a dagger into his heart. Every confession of love to Ares was a way of hurting Hephaestus, a constant reminder that their marriage had been imposed and not chosen. Despite Hephaestus' gestures and sacrifices to prove his love, Aphrodite could never accept it. Every show of affection from her husband was met with a wall of distrust and resentment from Aphrodite, who clung stubbornly to her longing for Ares. She felt increasingly alone in her current situation. At the meeting of the gods, where she had hoped to find support and understanding, she found herself more isolated than ever. She watched as her husband stood silently, his eyes closed in a gesture of deep reflection. Although she knew he had done everything he could for her, she could not help but feel a growing resentment towards him for the marriage that had been forced upon her against her will. The lack of support and understanding from others sowed doubt in Aphrodite's heart. Did they really love her as she had believed? The absence of advocates, even among those to whom she had given her love and trust, plunged her into an overwhelming sense of abandonment and hopelessness. Her gaze strayed to her husband, Hephaestus, and he opened his eyes. For a brief moment, she caught a flash of concern on his face. Aphrodite would not admit it, but she felt a spark of hope. However, when he shook his head and closed his eyes again, all hope vanished. Finding no support, he admitted his mistake. Oh, please. All right, I admit that I've meddled in some of your love lives. But that's all in the past now. Besides, Apollo isn't even here with us right now, and he's the only one who has the right to reproach me. I've interfered in his love life more than anyone else's. But we all know it was fun. You all know, don't you, who's with me? There was a long silence. Artemis felt completely irritated at the mention of her twin, who was now suffering a cruel and exaggerated punishment for someone who had been manipulated. The god had fallen in love with a mortal to the point of renouncing his divinity to be with her, but Aphrodite intervened and caused the woman to leave with another, leaving the god devastated. Artemis could not contain her irritation. The punishment my brother is suffering is excessive and cruel. He renounced his divinity for love, only to be betrayed. Can't you see, Aphrodite, the damage you have caused? She said in a firm voice, her tone laden with reproach and disapproval. Athena took the floor in a calm but firm tone. I agree with Artemis. There is no fun in making people suffer, Aphrodite. Feelings are not your personal plaything. You can't keep damaging relationships just because you feel bored or envy others. You must learn to respect the love and happiness of others instead of interfering with your whims and selfish desires. Your behavior only causes pain. It is time for you to reflect on your actions and consider the impact they have on others. Oh, Athena, Aphrodite snorted, casting a scornful glance at the goddess. What can you know about love or fun? Someone who is locked only in his library will never understand true love. That was a monumental mistake. If anyone could sway Zeus' opinion, it was the goddess of wisdom, and now she had upset the only one who could help her. Athena loved someone, but she had sworn an oath of chastity and knew that this god, in addition to wanting to be loved, wanted a family, something she could not offer him. For a brief moment, Athena glanced at Hephaestus, though it was so fleeting that no one noticed. And now she was truly furious at the memory that she could never be with the one she loved. Aphrodite cursed herself under her breath for not thinking before she spoke. She knew now that Athena would not advocate for her before Zeus. The hateful look she was giving him made it clear that she would not receive his help. You mentioned Apollo, Zeus began, overlooking Artemis' discomfort at his name. It's ironic, but since you seem to miss him, I'll grant you a small favor. Aphrodite was overcome with emotion. She had been forgiven and would be granted a favor. It was perfect. A radiant smile lit up her face, convinced that no one could ever be completely angry with her. She was simply perfect. Who could hate her? The answer was simple, no one. I will bestow upon you the honor of accompanying him in his punishment, Zeus began, causing the goddess' smile to slowly fade. Don't make that face, Aphrodite. You will share the punishment with Apollo. You will suffer worse than my afflicted son. Zeus' words struck Aphrodite like a bolt of lightning. Worry flashed in her eyes as she stammered, but that would mean that. You will be mortal, Zeus declared with satisfaction. You won't have your powers until you learn from your mistakes. You can't do this to me. Aphrodite screamed, gasping, horrified at the thought of facing something so unthinkable. How do you expect me to survive without my powers, without my beauty? You can't force me to be a mere mortal. I am a greater goddess than you, you can't. But her rebuke was silenced by Zeus. Can't I? Can't I? He repeated dangerously. You may be greater than I, but your power falls short of mine. For you are weak, Aphrodite, Zeus declared firmly. By accepting me as your leader and the king of Olympus, my decision was made, and all accepted it. Now you will have to abide by the consequences of your actions. Aphrodite felt a shudder run through her body as she tried to escape, but chains of celestial gold rose from the ground and bound her tightly. Get away from me! Aphrodite shouted as Zeus approached, accompanied by Hecate, who began to conjure a spell. A pattern of ancient symbols formed on the ground beneath Aphrodite, and she knew what it meant. If the spell was completed, she would become a mere mortal. Love! My beloved Ares, help me, cried Aphrodite desperately, hoping that her beloved would come to her aid. But he simply looked at her with boredom, which caused her deep pain. I love you, please help me, cried Aphrodite desperately, but Ares didn't even pay attention to her. Despair flooded her heart and tears escaped her eyes, but to those around her, that was of no consequence. Aphrodite had hurt so many with her actions that few were willing to show compassion. However, to everyone's surprise, Hephaestus rose from his seat. No one could believe that the one who had suffered the most because of Aphrodite was willing to help her. Aphrodite felt a glimmer of hope in her heart at the sight of her husband offering to help her. However, the resentment she had built up over the years was stronger than her gratitude, and as always, she spoke before she thought. What took you so long, you ugly good-for-nothing? She exclaimed gruffly, confident that her ugly husband would obey as he always did. But her harsh tone hid the faint hope that seeped into her heart. Hephaestus continued to advance. And just as Zeus prepared to intervene to prevent Aphrodite from being helped, he was surprised by his son's action. The goddess, confused and fearful, stammered as she watched Hephaestus walk past her. What do you think you're doing? But there was no answer. Hephaestus strode purposefully forward, completely oblivious to Aphrodite's presence beside him. His expression was impassive, as if he was completely focused on his goal and oblivious to the words or actions of others. Zeus, ready to intervene and stop any attempt to help Aphrodite, stopped dead in his tracks at the sight of his son's unexpected action. Surprise flashed in his eyes as he watched Hephaestus walk past the goddess without a word. Bound and filled with anger, Aphrodite turned to her husband and vented her resentment and shouted at her husband, "You are worthless. I hate you more than anyone else in this world. I have endured your loathsome presence ever since I was forcibly married to you, and every moment of our marriage has been agony, and your mother knows you're trash, so she never loved you." After venting her anger, she calmed down, but she couldn't help but feel bad about herself for allowing anger to rule her. Although she felt no regret for her words at the time, noticing how her husband turned his head towards her, Aphrodite could see a cute smile on Hephaestus' face. Surprise flooded everyone as tears began to well up in his eyes. "Hee, I know you hate me, and I know my mother doesn't love me. But in spite of everything, I love you both," he confessed, his voice breaking. With a sad tone, he added a simple, "Bye-bye, take care, Dite," before walking away from the venue. Tangled and charged with anger, Aphrodite turned to her husband and hurled her resentment at him in sharp words, "You are worthless. I hate you more than anyone else in this world. I have endured your loathsome presence ever since I was forcibly married to you, and every moment of our marriage has been agony, and your mother knows how despicable you are, so she never loved you." After venting, calm came over her, though she couldn't help but feel guilty for letting her anger get the better of her. Although she didn't regret what she had said at the time, when her husband bowed his head slightly, she was surprised to see the smile on his face. But surprise turned to astonishment when she noticed the tears welling up in Hephaestus' eyes. "I know you hate me, and I know my mother doesn't love me. But in spite of everything, I love you both," he confessed, his voice cracking. "Goodbye, take care of yourself," he added with a hint of melancholy before leaving the place. Aphrodite stood transfixed, unable to find words as she watched Hephaestus, feeling a sharp pain in her chest. Suddenly, the goddess who personified love, beauty and pleasure was transformed into a mere mortal. Zeus' final words echoed through the air with indescribable weight, like a thunderclap that shook Olympus. "No one will show you mercy, no one will show you kindness, for there is no such thing," were the words that echoed in Aphrodite's heart, like a heartbreaking echo that reverberated throughout her being. From the beginning of that day, Aphrodite had sensed that things would go wrong, but she never imagined the extent to which her life would take such an unfortunate turn. "Ugly, ugly, ugly," echoed in her mind over and over again. It was a reality that the former goddess could not help but face. Her new appearance was anything but attractive. As she reflected on her situation, she wondered how mortals could tolerate their own simplicity and shortcomings in their daily lives. The irony of her new mortal condition was a bad joke that she did not like. Now, no one dared hold her gaze for more than a few seconds. Glances were averted, and behind these gestures was a barely perceptible shudder. She had reached a point of ugliness that was almost unbearable to watch without shuddering. This was a completely new experience for her. Although in the past she had assumed different appearances according to the beauty standards of those who admired her, this transformation was different. The heartbreaking reality was that no one wanted to be with her. At that moment, the loneliness enveloped her tightly, like a persistent shadow that would not leave her. No one would come near her, even for the fun of it. She felt trapped behind an invisible barrier that separated her from the world, plunging her into a painful and desperate isolation. The thought made the goddess stop in her tracks, feeling the breath catch in her throat. No one wanted her. No. No. No, she mentally screamed at herself, unable to accept the idea that no one wanted her. She clung to the belief that everyone loved her, considering that this must be a simple joke or a test of her patience. Try as she might to convince herself that everyone loved her, deep inside she knew that the truth was different. No one really loved her. Yet she refused to accept it. She would be patient, she would show Zeus that his punishment had no effect on her. She would not change her mind or stop meddling in other people's love affairs. In her mind, there was no reason to change, for she considered herself perfect in every way. "At least Apollo found a home at Camp Half-Blood," the goddess murmured, feeling a hint of envy in her words. Her loneliness was becoming more palpable by the day, disturbing her and fueling her anger. But I can't even find the camp, she said bitterly to herself, pacing back and forth in a dark alley. Her expression reflected pent-up rage at not being able to find a safe place to settle. Meanwhile, here I am, alone in the middle of nowhere, she lamented in a frustrated whisper, her words lost in the void. The feeling of loneliness intensified with each passing moment, fueling her anger and despair. "No, I'm not even looking for the camp," she muttered in frustration, aware that she could not allow anyone to see her in this state, so mortal and without any beauty to show off. For long weeks, Aphrodite was alone, unaccompanied and without a fixed home. She spent many days hungry, subsisting on the streets and depending on the kindness of strangers for food. Her only hope was the idea that it would all be over soon. Despite the painful and lonely days, there was one special moment that brought him a glimmer of happiness. It was that one day a month a beautiful quail would appear, bringing him a sweet, a piece of fruit or a treat. But the most striking thing was the little letter that always accompanied the gesture. In it, the same question was repeated, "What is love?" She always perceived the note as a taunt directed at her, and consequently, she tossed it aside and concentrated on the food the bird brought. Her only hope was that Zeus would soon recognize his grave error and implore her to return to Olympus. She was convinced that everyone would realize how much they needed her. After all, who didn't need love in their lives? And since she represented love in its purest and most powerful form, she considered her presence indispensable to everyone. Days, months and even years passed, and Aphrodite faced a harsh reality: she was not needed in the world. She realized that she lived in a world where Aphrodite was not needed to corrupt the purity of love. Accepting that truth brought her deep pain and tears that fell unseen by anyone, for she was all alone. Her firm belief in her own importance kept her blinded to the hard truth: everyone needed love in their lives. Mortals longed to be loved. Without that feeling, they were mere shadows of themselves, empty and simple, like shells without pearls inside. Without love, they were fragmented, with a void that could not be filled. Now, deprived of her divinity, she faced the harsh reality of being mortal. She was beginning to understand the importance of love. She was lonely and torn by the absence of someone with whom to share her joys, her sorrows, her laughter and her tears, and to simply live life with that special person. It took her years to get used to the idea of no longer being a goddess. To accept her fragility and simplicity, and to realize that she no longer had control over the feelings of others. Aphrodite, the daughter of a primordial, had never imagined that she would one day live as a mere human. Being a goddess, with all her splendor and power, had always been an integral part of her identity. However, to now find herself in the position of a mortal was an unexpected and disconcerting twist in her divine life. 7 years had passed since her punishment when Aphrodite met the first person who did not mind her beauty. This person treated her kindly and offered her some money so she could eat. That gesture filled her with an indescribable happiness, as if a ray of light had pierced the darkness of her loneliness and given her back a little hope. For the first time in a long time, she felt that someone saw her for who she really was, beyond her appearance. A memory of her husband came to her, but she dismissed it. The person who had been kind to her was just a child, perhaps 11 or 12 years old, but he had been the first person to show her kindness in the desolate streets. After that day, she never saw her again, never even knew her name, but her act of kindness was deeply engraved in her heart. That experience marked a turning point in his life. For the first time, she found comfort in faith and hope. And for the first time she prayed to a goddess. She prayed to Hestia, the guardian of the home and the sacred fire, asking that the girl would find happiness and love in her home with her loved ones. 5 years passed. Aphrodite's life passed in solitude until 2 teenagers moved into the same alley where she lived. They were her first friends who did not judge her for her unbeautiful appearance. The girl had long golden hair and hazel eyes, while the boy stood out for his dark complexion and green eyes. It was evident that they were in love, even to Aphrodite, who, despite lacking her divine powers, could perceive the beautiful connection between them from the first instant. The love she saw in them was so touching that, at times, a few tears escaped Aphrodite's eyes. She was beginning to understand how beautiful it was to have someone who loved you unconditionally. The 2 young people, even in difficult situations, supported each other and always found reasons to laugh. They were truly wonderful people. Many times, they invited her to join them so that she would not feel alone. Even someone as proud as she was would silently pray to the other goddesses of love from different pantheons that her friends would always be in love and live happily together. One day, the three of them were together and chatting about trivial matters until her friend asked her a question. "What about you, Lissy?" she said, referring to Aphrodite by her mortal name. "What do you mean?" Aphrodite asked curiously. "Don't you have a partner, or someone you love?" In an instant, thousands of images flashed through her mind at an almost blinding speed. She relived the moments spent together with Ares, their dates, which for her were special, and their most romantic moments. But now it all seemed empty, as if it had all been fake. Thousands of years together with Ares that now meant nothing. It was then that the memory of her husband came. He always brought her flowers or gave her beautiful things, and many times he prepared a nice place to have their dates. However, she also remembered the times she stood him up. She decided to dismiss those memories, as she didn't want to admit that she missed her husband the most. The first few weeks of her punishment, Aphrodite looked forward to Ares' arrival. Aphrodite longed for Ares' presence. She hoped he would arrive to comfort her and take her back to Olympus. Any gesture that would show that he was there for her, that he loved her. But he never came. He never showed up to help her in her plight. Her hopes quickly faded when she realized that he would never show up. The pain of feeling abandoned by the person she had loved most was beginning to weigh on her more than ever. It was a sharp pain, a wound in her heart that would not heal easily. She was beginning to realize that even in that she had failed as a goddess of love. She had been wrong about the person to whom she had given her love. "Who could love me?" The former goddess whispered with bitterness in her voice, the truth behind her words causing agonizing pain in her soul. Who could love her? She wondered, feeling completely useless. She couldn't even get a lover who truly cared about her. Tears began to well up in the former goddess' eyes, unable to contain the flood of emotions that overwhelmed her. She could no longer bear her situation. She was not even adequately fulfilling her role as goddess of love. She had shattered the hearts of mortals and manipulated the feelings of millions without the slightest hint of remorse. She was cold, narcissistic, self-centered. She saw feelings as something to be trifled with and liked to see everyone's pain, for if she couldn't find happiness in her own life, she was determined to make sure no one else could find it. But no more, she exclaimed with determination. She would never be that cruel woman again. Now her own feelings were at stake. She had no one by her side, no friends, no family, no lovers, not even her husband. She had nothing. And she knew she deserved it all for being so cruel. She found herself with nothing. And she recognized that she deserved such desolation because of her own cruelty. "I don't deserve love," exclaimed Aphrodite with regret in her voice. "The one person who loved me madly, I simply trampled on her feelings without mercy. Please, Lissy," the mortal told her with a tender smile as she stroked her cheek and wiped away her tears. "Everyone deserves love in their life. But I was a horrible person." It was devastating to admit it, to feel the weight of the cruelty he had inflicted. Her heart twisted as she accepted the truth. "I ruined my many chances to earn my family's love. I preferred to have fun with strangers instead of being there for my family. I played with a lot of people's feelings without giving a damn," she admitted regretfully. "I said it was my job, even though it really wasn't. I wrecked my marriage," she confessed sadly. "I wrecked the man who loved me unconditionally, despite the cruel things I did to him. He was always there for me, showing me his love." Aphrodite could take no more and dropped to her knees on the floor, overwhelmed by a tide of tears that seemed to have no end. Each falling drop was like a reminder of her past mistakes, a painful echo of her actions that tormented her mercilessly. Her sobbing echoed in the silence, a wail that reflected the deep torment of her soul. The two mortals met each other's gaze, their hands clasped in a gesture of mutual love, before resting their compassionate eyes on the woman in front of them, whom they considered a friend. Instead of finding pity or contempt at their words, this one was surprised to find warm compassion and gentleness in her two friends. "Are you sorry?" the girl asked her as she crouched down to be on the same level as Aphrodite, who remained on the ground. It didn't sound like a question, it was more like a statement. With a slow movement, Aphrodite nodded. But I'm afraid it's too late. And I doubt anyone, especially him, will forgive me. For now, she remembered her last interaction with her husband Hephaestus and how she had treated him so cruelly. In spite of everything, he had told her that he loved her. The other gods must be enjoying a quiet, untroubled life not having her present. Probably, they would not care to hear her apologies and nor would they wish to have her back among them. They all love me, she had thought so childishly before. The truth was that no one loved her, no one needed her. She had already accepted that fact, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. It's never too late for a reconciliation, Lissy, the young mortal expressed. Even if it seems impossible or very difficult, there is always a second chance. The former goddess didn't want to admit it, but she had destroyed countless opportunities with the man who only sought her love. It's going to be all right, the girl continued. You'll see, you just need to have faith. After a long moment in silence, Aphrodite offered them the best smile she could muster in that instant. She said nothing, and there was nothing to say. They would never understand why she was so sure that she had no more chances, that she would not be welcome in Olympus again and that no one wanted her. Not without explaining her situation to them, and that was something she couldn't do. After all, they were her friends and she wanted to keep them that way. She shouldn't involve two innocent mortals in the conflicts of the gods. As absurd as it seemed, she didn't want to see them, her only friends, hurt because of her. After all, those simple humans she had once mocked now meant so much in her life. For the first time in years, Aphrodite, a goddess who was vain and selfish, now found herself thinking of someone other than herself. You know what, my father is completely wrong, she began, which caused both mortals to turn to look at her curiously. She softened her smile and looked at them tenderly. True kindness does exist. I am so grateful to have met them and to be able to call them my friends. My first friends. The little mortal couple exchanged a look full of complicity before a tender smile illuminated their faces. Without saying a word, they extended their arms towards Aphrodite, wrapping her in a warm and comforting embrace. We too feel deeply fortunate to have you as a friend, Lissy, they whispered in unison, letting their words permeate the air with genuine sweetness. She felt her cheeks moisten slightly, and it took her a moment to realize that she was crying. But they were not tears of sadness, but of gratitude for having someone's genuine affection. For the first time in a long time, she was experiencing a kind of love she had ignored before, a genuine, warm love. And most surprising of all, it hadn't even been necessary to use her divine powers to win someone's affection. That simple fact filled her with a happiness she had never known before. To feel loved by those around her, without the need for adornment or artifice, was a new experience for Aphrodite. She discovered, in the midst of tears and emotion, that true wealth was not to be found in the adoration of her followers or in the ostentation of her beauty, but in the genuine connection she shared with those who accepted her as she was. And so, several years passed, her friends got her an apartment. For they had managed to better themselves and build a better life. They married and started a beautiful family. She was the maid of honor at their wedding and had the privilege of being godmother to their children. As time went by, their meetings became less frequent, until the years passed, and they both departed this world. In the present, the former goddess was an old woman of 65 years. The truth was that the idea of returning to Olympus no longer mattered to her as much as before. After all, she had realized that she had been a better person as a mortal than as a goddess. She was beginning to think that maybe it was better never to go back. That way, the others could be happy. And then she wouldn't hurt anyone, especially her loving husband, who never deserved to suffer for her. She sat in front of the window of her simple apartment, where she kept fond memories of her friends. Every corner of the room evoked shared moments, immersing her in nostalgia. The photographs hanging on the wall told stories of laughter and complicity, while the small details scattered around the room evoked moments she treasured in her heart. In that space filled with memories, she found solace and companionship in the soft evening light. Carefully, her wrinkled hands caressed the quail that always visited her, finding in its soft plumage a silent comfort. She was aware of her situation and knew it was her end, her time was near, she could feel it throbbing in every beat of her tired heart. Yet, in the serenity of that moment, She found peace in the fact that she had lived a life full of love and precious memories. It was better that way. And if she ceased to exist, she was confident that there would be someone else to fill her role as goddess of love. However, her hopes went beyond mere succession. She longed for her successor to do a more outstanding job than her own, to infuse the world with an even deeper and more enduring love. In his mind, he envisioned a world where love would be the dominant force, where relationships would flourish on Earth, and where compassion and empathy would spread like a warm mantle over all beings. It was his final wish. Now she knew for certain, no one deserved to have their heart hurt. Mortals didn't need a goddess of love as narcissistic and self-centered as she was. She only hoped that her successor would right all her wrongs. And if possible, I would like her to take care of my loved ones as I never did, Aphrodite whispered sadly, for she deeply longed to have the opportunity to say goodbye to her loved ones, to embrace her children for the last time and to confess to them all the love she held in her heart. But most of all, she longed to be able to look her husband in the eye and ask his forgiveness for all the times she had hurt him, for not having been the loving and understanding companion he deserved. It was an overwhelming desire, charged with regret and longing for redemption. However, she knew that time was running out and that this would be impossible. The deep, resonant voice from the door behind him broke the silence with an unexpected affirmation. I think that's the first time I've ever heard you think something completely selfless and sincere, Dite, she said. Aphrodite flinched as she heard the deep voice coming from the door behind her back. It was a familiar voice, but at the same time, charged with mixed emotions. In an instant, 1,000 memories flashed through her mind, causing her weak and aging heart to race. A warm, comforting feeling flooded his stomach as he struggled to process the presence of the one he had always ignored. For what were once memories with distaste of her husband going to great lengths to win her over now, she missed and longed for him with all her being. Every gesture of love and dedication he had shown her took on a new meaning in her heart, awakening an intense desire to feel his presence by her side again. She eventually realized how much she needed him, not only as her companion, but as the only one who truly understood and accepted her. It was an overwhelming feeling, a deep longing that enveloped her completely and reminded her of how much she had lost by pushing him out of her life. Hephaestus, the name escaped Aphrodite's lips involuntarily as she watched her reflection in the glass. She heard footsteps approaching where she stood, and saw the figure of a tall man with reddish hair. His dark skin was marked by birthmarks that looked like tattoos, running all the way down his body to his face. At that moment she realized that, had she been less superficial she would have appreciated that her husband was not ugly, he was simply different from the rest. His unique features gave him an exotic and fascinating touch. "Hello, Aphrodite. It's been a long time since we last saw each other," he said in a warm, comforting voice. She found herself closing her eyes and sighing softly at his presence. Never before had she thought she found his company so comforting and special, but she decided not to think too much about it. She was about to die anyway, she knew. It was extremely obvious. That was why someone from Olympus had finally bothered to come and visit her. It was a bit outrageous that only at such moments, when she was about to die, someone would come to see her, but she didn't mind too much. In those moments, as he felt his mortal life slowly fading away, like the wilting petals of a flower, the comforting closeness of someone at his side was his only consolation. "Hello Dash." The barely whispered reply of the weakened and aged Aphrodite echoed in the room, like a distant echo of her former splendor. That greeting was the whisper of someone whose vitality was slowly fading, but whose presence still exuded an aura of grace and dignity. There was a long pause. Aphrodite did not find enough strength to even move, so she resigned herself to just watching him through the reflection in the window. But even if she had had the strength to turn around, she did not know what she should do. For next to her was the man who had once held her heart in his hands and only shattered it. In her early years, Aphrodite had fantasized thousands of times about the idea of some other god of Olympus visiting her. But in time, she realized that she was alone and came to accept the harsh truth: no one loved her. At times, Aphrodite would close her eyes and for moments she could swear that she could perceive Athena's presence at her side. And sometimes she would see the shadow of Athena who seemed to accompany her, mocking and pointing out the cruel irony of her sad situation and of her whole life. "Oh, Athena, what can you know of love or fun?" thought Aphrodite bitterly. In the end, her own words had backfired on her. She would never admit it out loud, or maybe she would, she still wasn't sure if she should apologize or not. But now she was admitting that even the goddess of wisdom and strategies knew more about love than she, the supposed goddess of love. In time, Aphrodite realized that, in the past, she had focused her attention on a superficial and vain kind of love. Eventually she realized that there were numerous forms of love, all extremely important and unique. She had failed as a goddess of love. Sadly, she had failed in her role as a goddess of love by ignoring the affections she could have received from her family, friends, and her loyal and loving husband. She was conscious of destroying the most important love she could have in her life. However, every time she opened her eyes, the figure of Athena vanished, leaving the former goddess of love in a deeper loneliness than ever. Until then, she had never had constant companionship, except for her two mortal friends and a loyal quail, whose presence filled her days with joy. Although she had longed on multiple occasions for the company of some acquaintance from Olympus to ease her loneliness, she found herself disoriented and at a loss as to how to act, and her husband appeared at her side. What was she to do now? Her relationship with her husband had always been difficult, mainly because of her own actions that continually hurt him. With a feeling of pain, Aphrodite recalled the cruel words she had addressed to her husband on their wedding day: "I am the perfect example of the woman any god would wish to have as a wife, and it is pitiful to be tied to you." She remembered how she had said it to hurt him, and how he had done his best not to cry. It was ironic, ridiculous, and even childish. Who could want to be married to someone who thought only of herself and showed no respect for her marriage? The real lucky one had been her, although it took her years to realize that fact. Guilt grew intensely inside her, rising from her chest to lodge in her throat, a knot that made her feel as if she were about to choke. After a few seconds, she was surprised to discover that she was crying, her frail body trembling with silent sobs. Embarrassed, she tried to hide her face in her hands. Before, she used to scoff at her husband's appearance, but now the situation had been reversed. She was the one who looked aged and wrinkled, and in her vulnerability, she probably looked pathetic crying. She knew that, in her current situation, any god would probably mock her, and although she could bear that, she would completely fall apart if the one who had loved her so fervently also mocked her state. However, the situation intensified when the god placed his hands on her shoulders, giving her a gentle squeeze that was intended to bring her comfort. Before that small and unexpected gesture of kindness, the ex-goddess could no longer contain herself and burst into loud sobs. "Hephaestus, you don't know how sorry I am," said the former goddess between sobs. The surprise was reflected in Hephaestus' face when she asked, "May I know why you are apologizing?" He asked. How could he ask that? Wasn't it obvious? "You were always so sweet, and I reciprocated by hurting your gentle heart," she confessed, her voice breaking with emotion. "Forgive me for everything, please. For all the suffering I caused you," she began to say, her voice cracking with emotion. "I was terrible to you. You always loved me, always cared for me, protected me, waited patiently for me. Even after hundreds of years, you still stood by me and waited." A sob shook her frail mortal body, as Hephaestus' grip on her shoulders softened. "I am so sorry. I am a lousy wife." There was a brief pause. A fear invaded Aphrodite's frail body, and she feared that perhaps he could never forgive her for having been such a bad wife. But then, she was surprised to feel warm lips on her cheek. Her aging heart pounded harder, reviving that almost forgotten feeling that was beginning to feel strangely familiar, a beautiful feeling she had always ignored. It was almost like forgetting a beautiful song, only to hear it again and realize you still remember the melody. Now she knew it. It was the most genuine love of all, love for your special someone. "You don't have to apologize for anything," Hephaestus said in a soft voice. "Are you ready?" The question was direct and clear. Aphrodite immediately understood what he meant. It was too obvious and, honestly, she didn't want to prolong the situation any longer. She was exhausted, her weak body could take no more. Although she wished for a second chance, this time to make the man she should have always loved and cared for happy, she knew it was too late. "To die?" "Yes," answered Aphrodite with a tone of regret in her voice. but with a slight smile, because at least she was leaving knowing that her husband did not hate her. Hephaestus watched Aphrodite with a curious look, tilting his head to the right as if analyzing her words and her unusual behavior. Sometimes the other gods were right, he was somewhat clumsy in understanding others. He found it complex to understand the behavior of others, he had always been better with machines. Are you at ease with the thought of dying? Would you accept death that easily? Hephaestus asked with genuine curiosity, wanting to understand his wife. The answer is yes, she replied without hesitation. I have been a lousy goddess, a lousy mother, a horrible wife, and a bad friend. My mortal life was the result of all my mistakes. The life I led these last years. I didn't live it with the best luxuries, but at least I was a better mortal than goddess. I had 2 friends who loved me for who I was, no matter that I was no longer beautiful. And I also had the company of a pretty quail, who brightened my days. My life was normal, but I lived it trying to be a better person. If my end has come, I will not resist. I will let myself be wrapped in Thanatos' cold arms. All I wish is that he will have mercy on me, and that my life in the underworld will be better and that I will not be punished for the stupid things I did in the past. She had closed her eyes again, lost in her own monologue. She was forced to open them when she heard her husband's loud laughter. Unconsciously, she tried to turn around to watch him, but her bones protested, as her body was so deteriorated, and she was content to listen to her husband's cute laughter, though she was overcome with curiosity as to why he was laughing. By the gods, she had never been so desperate to see him before. She longed to turn around and see him face to face, to hug him, to give him endless kisses and make up to him for all he had denied her in the past. It was a strange feeling, she needed to look him straight in the eye, to make sure that he was really her husband, that he was really there with her and was not just a hallucination of her old age. You have changed, Aphrodite, but you are still melodramatic, said Hephaestus with a knowing smile. Melodramatic? The former goddess had not been described that way in many years. Despite the situation, she found herself smiling. For just hearing her husband's voice filled her soul with joy. Tell me about your punishment, Hephaestus asked calmly. What did you learn? The word punishment sounded strange to Aphrodite, who had not heard it for many years. She remembered with regret how, in the early years of her punishment, she had cursed Zeus and insulted him, considering it a great injustice what had been done to her. At that time, she held a childish view, thinking that everyone should love her. But now, to his surprise, with a new perspective, he realized that he no longer saw his situation as a punishment. Rather, she considered it an invaluable lesson that taught her to be better. I learned that I am probably the worst goddess ever, she confessed with a smile, for she had accepted her reality and that somehow comforted her. Hephaestus raised an eyebrow, curious, but did not interrupt, allowing Aphrodite to continue and deepen her explanation. I used to play with people's feelings, and that's wrong. Love is a precious thing that should be protected, not harmed by someone like me. The experiences of my mortal life taught me a lot. Mortals already face too much pain for someone like me to spoil that little ray of happiness they could find in love. Where are you going with that, Aphrodite? Hephaestus asked. She paused for a moment before answering. All the pain, all the suffering I caused those poor mortals for so many years. I should never have done something like that. I don't like this feeling I have inside, I don't like to think that I was so cruel and capable of hurting others just for fun. A couple of tears welled up in her eyes, for it pained her to know that she had hurt countless people who were meant to fall in love, and that she had spoiled their destinies. More tears flowed from Aphrodite when her husband spoke. Love hurts, and it hurts a lot, said the god, and the way he expressed it only added more shame and guilt to the former goddess. Of course, he would feel that way, she had taken it upon herself to teach him how painful love could be, especially when it was unrequited. Do you know what hurts me the most? Hephaestus asked. She kept silent, waiting for his answer. Not being loved by those I love the most, he answered, giving her a soft look, with a small glint in his eyes that reflected the pain he had felt. Aphrodite did not need to turn or use her powers to feel her husband's pain, it was palpable and deep, resonating with her own regret. But love goes beyond the romantic, Hephaestus began, but was interrupted by Aphrodite. Love is not everything, she whispered, surprising the god behind his back. At least not romantic love. Not what I thought was romantic love. That was just lust. I spent so many years chasing a misconception of love. There are many kinds of love. Hephaestus nodded slowly at what his wife had expressed. But you never cared about other kinds of love than romantic, or what you thought was romantic. She didn't argue with him, she knew he was telling the truth. There was a small, almost imperceptible pause. Then, the former goddess found herself unable to tear her eyes away from the reflection of the god behind her back. Why are you here? Why did you, after so many years and so much pain, come to me? How is it that, even after having shattered your heart countless times, you treat me with such affection when I don't deserve it? She knew that, after all the damage he had caused her, it was incomprehensible that he would be there for her in her last moments. You know why I'm here, Aphrodite. Hephaestus paused a moment. For better or worse, together for all eternity. That was the vow I swore when I married you. At these words, she could not help but smile, touched by her husband's devotion. The strange feeling returned, causing Aphrodite to close her eyes in pain. So many years without feeling that, and now she felt it. No, she couldn't allow herself to feel that just when she was about to die. She wouldn't be able to give up that feeling after so many years without him. She didn't want to accept that she loved him, not now, when she was about to die and couldn't live with her beloved husband. I'm glad it's you, she whispered softly, and as best she could, still on her back, she leaned back against her husband's hard chest. Immediately, Hephaestus' hands came down to give her a hug, responding to the small gesture of appreciation she was giving him. I would not have chosen anyone else to be here with me in my last moments of life. The sincerity in his words surprised him, but the god behind his back with a hint of rancor in his voice found himself muttering, not even Ares. No. It makes me happy that it's you here with me. Just you and me, that would be a perfect ending for me, Aphrodite admitted, conviction in her voice. There was a long pause. It was completely true what the former goddess had said. Ares was never there for her in her punishment, not even when she begged him multiple times to rescue her. He never did anything. Yet Hephaestus, the person she had hurt the most in her life, was there with her at the end of her existence. She preferred someone sincere and selfless to be there, not someone selfish like Ares. I love you, said the goddess at last, and she was sincere with what she felt, and it felt good to confess what she felt for the man she must have loved from the beginning. I didn't come here because you are dying, Aphrodite, said Hephaestus with a soft smile. She opened her eyes suddenly. What? Was all she managed to say. You're not dying, Aphrodite, there was a hint of amusement in her voice. Then what was this pain she felt in her body? What was this fragility that prevented her from even moving? Aphrodite wondered, not understanding what was happening. It's not your time yet. Besides, that's not why I'm here. Then why are you here? The words didn't seem to come out of Hephaestus, but after a few seconds of hesitation, he managed to speak. I am here because I missed you. I missed you very much, my beautiful Dite. Did you? You missed me. Why? Asked an astonished Aphrodite. How was it possible that someone missed her? How was it possible that he still wanted to see her? How could it be that he still looked at her with love? If this was a dream, she didn't want to wake up. I love you, he said simply, as if those words could explain everything. He loved her, he missed her, he had gone to see her. Simple, wasn't it? In a way, for him it explained everything. But to her, it made no sense at all. She tried to ignore the way her body seemed to react to those words, finding some strength in them, as if they gave her hope. As much as she wanted to accept that sweet love, she mentally denied she knew she didn't deserve her husband's love. Why don't you hate me? Why don't you shout at me? Why now? Why now, when I love you, I am sure you cannot love me. Can't you see I am only an old woman? A flash of pain quickly crossed her purple eyes, but she hid it at once, not wanting to show her suffering. I heard you well, Aphrodite, I love you. How can you love me? I am a disaster. No one loves me, no one needs me. I am nobody. I am nothing, Although she wanted to accept that sweet love, inside she denied it, convinced that she didn't deserve her husband's love. Why don't you hate me? Why don't you shout at me? Why now? Why now, when I love you? I'm sure you can't love me. Can't you see I'm just a damn old woman about to die? The last thing she said, raising her voice, and a flash of pain crossed her purple eyes, but she quickly hid it, for she didn't want to show her suffering. You heard me well, Aphrodite. I love you. How can you love me? I'm a mess of a person. No one loves me, no one needs me, I'm nobody. I am nothing, I. Her monologue, laden with self-deprecation, was interrupted when Hephaestus leaned over and deposited a gentle kiss on her wrinkled forehead. The gesture was made with affection. That's not true. I love you, I need you. To me, you are so much more than just nobody. You've changed and I can see that you've improved as a person. He paused, waiting for her to understand, but she did not. Hephaestus sighed slightly, as sometimes his wife could be a bit dense to grasp these things. Hephaestus looked at her serenely, his voice soft but firm. You have changed, Aphrodite. You recognized your mistakes and stopped being selfish. Your punishment is over. Your punishment is over. Those words echoed deeply in Aphrodite's mind. She gasped, surprised. What? She tried to move but could not. She blushed, realizing that even that news didn't give her the strength to move. She remained still in the same place, with an expression of confusion and astonishment marking her wrinkled face. With a small sigh that might have concealed a slight chuckle, Hephaestus lifted her up in his arms bridal style, showing unusual gentleness for someone who was not always well suited to human interactions and who, moreover, possessed supernatural strength. Aphrodite blushed as she was carried, now embarrassed by her physique. But seeing Hephaestus smile and realizing that he was not shallow as she had been in the past, she mentally cursed herself for having been so blind for so many years and ignoring the love of her devoted Hephaestus. Let's go home, Zeus and everyone is waiting for us. There you will regain your original body and your powers, said Hephaestus. But I'm not ready. She herself couldn't believe she was saying that, but the words were coming out of her mouth without her permission. I don't know how to love properly, I can teach you to love properly, Hephaestus answered her with affection. He paused a little, his expression reflecting a slight concern. Only if you wish, I will guide you. If not, I'm sure someone else can help you. Or you will learn it yourself in your own way, the last she said sadly, for she was afraid that Aphrodite would go back to her old self. Aphrodite felt a deep pain as she saw the fear in her husband's eyes. A feeling of great guilt came over her as she realized the hurt she had caused him. But she was determined to change, and that change would begin now. Putting aside her self-pity, and with effort she raised her trembling hands and gently caressed the face of Hephaestus, who was surprised by this tender gesture. Learning to love, and especially with you, will be a wonderful thing. If you allow me to be the lucky woman, I swear by the river Styx to make you happy. Hephaestus wore the most beautiful smile Aphrodite had ever seen in her life, and she couldn't help but sigh a little as she leaned against his chest. She had never before perceived how warm the aura Hephaestus radiated. Shall we go home, my beloved husband? He nodded, his face lit up with excitement. Let's go home, Dite, Hephaestus replied, full of hope for what this new stage of their life would bring. As they approached Olympus, various looks of surprise were directed towards the elderly figure that Hephaestus held in his arms. Aphrodite, however, paid no attention to these stares. She simply let herself go, relaxed in her husband's arms. Are you ready to be Aphrodite again, goddess of love, beauty, sexuality, desire and pleasure? Hephaestus asked her. I am ready, and from now on you will be my priority, my darling, she answered, putting all the love she could into her words. With each step they took towards Olympus, a pink aura enveloped Aphrodite's weakened body. Her wrinkles began to disappear, and her rough skin transformed into a smooth, beautiful complexion. Her hair, once graying with age, regained its vitality and took on a rosy hue. Her face, which had lost some of its beauty, not only rejuvenated, but, in the eyes of Hephaestus, appeared even more beautiful than before. All this was happening without Aphrodite noticing, for she was immersed in her memories, reflecting on how she had begun her journey to becoming a better person. She still remembered that day when Zeus made her mortal. Back then, she thought it was the worst day of her immortal existence. She felt alone and rejected by everyone, until she met her two best friends and the years passed, her perspective changed. At first, she had seen her mortality as a severe punishment. But now, looking back, that moment didn't seem so heinous. It was not a punishment. It was, rather, a valuable lesson, an opportunity to improve. Hephaestus gave a faint smile, one that immediately caught Aphrodite's attention. Settling comfortably, she half opened one eye and turned her gaze to her husband. "What's so funny, honey?" Aphrodite asked, curious about the reason for his joy. "Nothing, love, I was just admiring how beautiful you are," Hephaestus replied softly, his words bathed in genuine affection. At that moment, a realization hit Aphrodite. She had regained her divinity, her divine essence had been fully restored. At this revelation, instead of turning away as the Aphrodite of old would have done, she moved with fluid grace to draw closer to him. With a gaze full of new feelings and firm resolve, she shifted her position to give him a passionate kiss. The kiss was intense and revealing, full of all the repressed emotions and reborn love they both shared. When their lips finally parted, Aphrodite returned to her previous position, leaning back against Hephaestus' chest. She hid her face against him, a gesture of shyness and emotion. It was the first kiss she had shared with someone who truly loved her, someone whose heart fully corresponded to hers. She could feel Hephaestus' heart beating loud and clear, a powerful echo of her own heart now beating with an intensity she couldn't remember ever feeling before. "Thank you for never losing faith in me," whispered Aphrodite, small tears welling in her eyes, feeling in her heart that she was not worthy of such devotion. Hephaestus continued on his way, but, instead of heading for the Hall of the Gods, he took a detour, for he had a special surprise in store for Aphrodite. Hearing the sound of a door opening, Aphrodite looked up, and her face lit up with happiness as she saw all her children gathered in front of her. "My babies!" she shouted with joy, jumping out of Hephaestus' arms to run to them and wrap them in a warm, loving embrace. After that tender moment, a peculiar sound caught her attention. Turning, she saw Hephaestus on his knees, holding a small box from which he was pulling a dazzling ring. "I know that in the past you were forced to marry me by force, but I want..." Hephaestus began to say, but could not finish. "Yes. Yes, I do," exclaimed Aphrodite, interrupting him excitedly, before running to him and throwing herself into his arms, embracing the most wonderful man in the world. At that moment, they both felt that, regardless of the past, their future together was full of promise and renewed love. Now, Aphrodite was certain that she could learn the true meaning of love. Not just lustful love, but all the different kinds of love, loyal love, unconditional love, love for friends, love for family. And thus, to be a better goddess and the best wife in the world. She was sure of only one thing: she wanted that, when that happened, by her side would be the only person who had always been with her at all times. The man who always loved her and waited for her. Her dear husband Hephaestus. She smiled sincerely and said, "I will be with you faithfully through thick and thin." Then they kissed, and at that moment it could be seen that Aphrodite was wearing a wedding dress. A great hall surrounded them, where only Aphrodite's children and their friends, Hephaestus and Aphrodite, were present. But the most important thing was the presence of their two mortal friends, who had come thanks to Hades. A quail landed on Hephaestus' shoulder, and Aphrodite knew without a doubt that her husband had never left her alone, and had sent the bird so that she would not feel alone in her most difficult moments. Hephaestus looked at her with love and asked her, "Tell me, my dear Dite, do you already know what love is?" She answered, "It is you. You make my heart full of love. I love you, I love my children, and I love to know that you love me." End of the story. A story inspired by one I read. The original story is by Gallifreyan. I have started my classes at the university. I will try to keep a steady pace, but there will be times when I will be inactive due to my studies. Remember that on Sundays I will be reading your comments. If you have something to say, you can leave it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Remember that if you are not subscribed, you can help me grow on YouTube by subscribing to my YouTube channel.
A giant hello to the subscribers and followers of the channel. If you want to be in this part of the video, just say so. The first to respond will be included in this section dedicated to greetings. Before you go, you can watch my last two videos. And if you like it, don't hesitate to subscribe. I would appreciate it a lot.